Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to join us this afternoon. I'm especially delighted to see so many of you and to see so many of our faculty, students, and a number of our local government officials. Welcome to all of you. Stanford University was founded on the idea that we have a responsibility to advance and utilize knowledge for the greater community. And we have a long history of incubating new ideas and helping to put them to work in the real world. Recently, the economy has created challenges for all of us, universities included. But we're here today to announce a wonderful story that demonstrates that even in difficult times, we can move forward, enabling universities to apply their vast knowledge and capability to help solve some of the world's biggest challenges. And certainly, energy is one of the most important problems we face. It poses a three-pronged dilemma. First, our dependence on foreign sources of petroleum undermines our national security. Second, instability in pricing and generally rising prices for petroleum endanger our economic stability and our competitiveness. Third, and most importantly, our large and growing use of fossil fuels around the world leads to global warming and threatens our ecosystem and our very way of life. As president of Stanford University, it gives me great pleasure to announce that the university, in partnership with a group of visionary individuals, will launch an important new research institute focused solely on finding solutions to our global energy issues. The Precourt Institute for Energy at Stanford will be an independent laboratory that will engage leaders in the scientific community across the campus and around the world, working to overcome all three aspects of the energy challenge. The new institute builds on efforts beginning more than 5 years ago to increase our research and teaching devoted to that global energy challenge. Over the past 5 years, through projects such as the Global Climate and Energy Project and other ones, we have increased the amount of research funding for energy issues by a factor of approximately 7 times. We felt, however, that these amounts were simply inadequate. We need to hire more faculty and recruit more top graduate students and postdoctoral students. With the downturn in the endowment and the resulting reduction in university finances, it could have taken a decade or longer to get to the level of investment that we believe is necessary. Fortunately, we found 2 sets of founding donors who not only were willing to support the effort, but who have urged us to develop a comprehensive program that has shaped our direction. They led the way with their vision, wise counsel, and gifts to make this new center a reality. Jay Precourt, undergraduate and graduate alumnus, and his family, together with Tom Steyer, graduate from the Stanford Business School and current Stanford trustee, and Kat Taylor, dual degree holder from our business school and our law school, are responsible for the creation of this new institute. Other donors, including Doug Kimmelman, Mike Raffato, and the Schmidt Family Foundation, joined, so that in total, we have already raised $100 million for this new institute. Thank you. The Precourt Institute for Energy, initiated by a $50 million gift from Jay Precourt, will be a broad-based effort to attack the problem of providing energy in a sustainable fashion for a growing world. Existing efforts, including GCEP and the Center for Energy Efficiency, will be included in this activity. And we will establish relationships with other interdisciplinary programs on campus, including the program on energy and sustainable development, activities at the SLAC National Accelerator Center, and more than 20 departments across our campus. A major new center, the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy, funded by a $40 million gift from Tom Steyer and Kat Taylor, will focus on the challenge of moving to a future where renewable energy is both economically competitive and environmentally friendly and becomes the energy source of choice. This center will explore new technologies with the goal of making renewable energy cheaper than fossil fuels, as well as policy approaches that will accelerate a future based on sustainable energy. This is a complex and long-term undertaking that will engage the minds of hundreds of faculty and thousands of students in the years ahead. But our success will impact millions, if not billions, of lives across our planet. A key to making a new initiative like this successful is wise and experienced faculty leadership. We had such an individual at Stanford. Lynn Orr, a 24-year veteran of our faculty, a distinguished scientist, a great teacher, former dean of the School of Earth Sciences, and the inaugural director of the GCEP project. There was no one better at Stanford, there was no one better in the country to lead this new effort. And Lynn has agreed to serve as the inaugural director for the Precourt Institute. So now I'll turn the podium over to Lynn, who will say a few words and then introduce our panel. Lynn Orr.
So John failed to note that my original appointment at Stanford was as a hasher at Encina Commons, and I did make it to the exalted position of head hasher at Encina Commons. So I actually do have some experience here. That was a long time ago. So let me just tell you a little bit about the activities of the Institute. It's only possible to create an institute like this because we have an extremely talented group of students and faculty all across the university. Now, it's risky to count them, but I tried to do that. And according to my count, we have 136 faculty distributed among 21 departments. And our ability to do this at all really rests on those disciplinary strengths. They are an essential part of it. But we're trying to bring them together in a new way to work on problems that really cut across all our disciplines and allow us to add some strength to that substantially. So you can think of the new Precourt Institute for Energy as a parallel and a complement to the Woods Institute for the Environment. Both of these organizations work on problems of great societal importance and do it with talented students and faculty across the whole university. So let me talk briefly about the components. As John said, we will establish the Tomcat Center for Sustainable Energy. This recognizes the importance of moving to energy resources that have a much greater use of renewable resources, like the sun. Energy from sunlight is abundant on the planet. About 6,000 times more energy arrives at the surface of the Earth than we humans use now. But we need to reduce the cost of converting that energy into electricity and other forms we can use. That's an area where our expertise in the fundamental science of materials can be put to work in a much bigger way than we do now. Let me just give you one example, and my faculty colleagues know that I could go on and on about this, but I won't. I'll be brief. We now have the ability to control material structures at very small scale, so-called nanostructured materials. We can use that control to make materials that have entirely new properties that allow us to move light in new ways, known as photonics, and turn light into electricity or to split water to make hydrogen. Research in these areas will allow us to find ways to reduce the cost of converting sunlight into other useful forms. Now, to make greater use of energy that comes from the sun, which includes wind and biomass, we will also need an improved electric grid that can manage widely distributed intermittent generating sources and demand at the user side of the grid. And technology breakthroughs are needed in energy storage, both at small scale for vehicles and at large scale for the grid. With better batteries in electric vehicles, for example, our use of imported oil could decline significantly. This new center will also allow us to work on a host of societal, economic, and policy questions that are also critically important. While we need technology breakthroughs, we also need to foster sustainable energy use through markets and the regulatory environments in which they work. An essential first step is putting a price on carbon emissions through a carbon tax or a cap-and-trade system, for example. But after that, we need to have markets that price energy in a way that reflects its impacts and better ways to help people understand how their own choices in energy use can contribute to a sustainable energy future. The existing Center for Energy Efficiency will be an important part of the new institute. It will continue its work on energy-efficient buildings and transportation and on the systems that link people to the use of energy. The earliest returns on investments will come from improving efficiency, and we've left ourselves a fair amount of room to do better on that score. The Global Climate and Energy Project will also be part of the new institute. It will focus on breakthrough research across the full spectrum of conversions of energy from primary energy resources to some energy form that we can use, with an emphasis on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So how will we use the resources that John mentioned? We will establish 5 new endowed professorships. With careful use of matching funds, it'll be my job to pry those resources out of the deans. We should be able to make 6 to 8 new faculty appointments in critical areas of research and teaching. We will create 20 new Stanford interdisciplinary graduate fellowships in energy. Those fellowships will help us attract and support the most talented graduate students around to work on energy research. Similarly, we will establish competitive postdoctoral fellowships to allow us to deploy talent at that level too. We will create an energy research innovation fund that can provide seed funding for 2-year projects that can explore new ideas in energy conversions. As a first step and to kick off the activities of the new institute, we will conduct a competition for new projects with funding of $2 million this spring. We will also use the institute to take a detailed look at the way we teach about energy across the institution, both at the graduate and undergraduate levels. We've been working hard on expanding course offerings in energy, but we can do better. So the new institute will allow us to work much more effectively on the spectrum of energy research, from the basic sciences to technology to end-use efficiency, and with a healthy dose of markets, economics, social behavior, and policy as well. The energy challenge is a big and very important one, but it is just the sort of challenge the students and faculty at Stanford should tackle with enthusiasm. We are very grateful for the support that makes it possible for us to do that in this way. Thank you. Now, I suspect that you didn't all turn up to listen to me. So let me introduce the panel because they are a great reason to be here. They're a very talented group. So in alphabetical order, Sally Benson is a professor in the Department of Energy Resources Engineering and the director of the Global Climate and Energy Project here at Stanford. That was a job I used to hold, but we decided to go with somebody more competent. Of course, GCEP will be an important part of the new group. Now, we swiped her from the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, where she was the Deputy Director for Operations and Associate Director for Energy Sciences. She definitely knows her way around the energy research, and hence there is no truth to the rumor that we hired her in retaliation for Lawrence Berkeley's piracy of Steve Chu from Stanford. John Doerr is a partner at Kleiner Perkins Caulfield & Byers, where he sponsored a series of investments in companies that you might have heard of: Compaq, Cypress, Intuit, Netscape, Lotus, Millennium Pharmaceuticals, S3, Sun Microsystems, Amazon.com, Symantec, and Google. You have heard of some of those, right? He's been heavily involved in investing in green energy startups, and he shared his expertise in that area with Congress last week. Today, we're hoping that he'll do so with us. Eric Schmidt is CEO of Google. He has led the growth of Google's considerable infrastructure and product development and its substantial efforts to make its own operations more energy efficient and to make renewables less expensive than carbon-based fuels. He's been advising the Obama transition team, and I will hope he'll advise us, all of us here as well. Jim Sweeney is a professor in the Department of Management Science and Engineering and director of the Center for Energy Efficiency. It's currently called the Precourt Institute for Energy Efficiency, but it will become part of this new institute, and that will be a very important part of it. He's been engaged in energy research here at Stanford since 1972, and he's been working with the state of California to assess the economic feasibility of potential reductions in greenhouse gas emissions to meet the requirements of AB 32. Jane Woodward is CEO of MAP, a private firm focused on acquiring and managing natural gas royalty interests and renewable energy royalty interests, primarily associated with commercial wind and solar projects, all onshore in the US. Setting an example for all of us, MAP applies its own internal carbon tax to its activities, and much of that supports student teaching about energy here at Stanford. Since 1990, Jane herself has been a consulting professor here where she teaches classes on energy and the environment. So we have a very good group. Let's jump right in. I'll begin with some questions to get the conversation started, and then we'll open the floor for questions from the audience. Now, I have admonished the group that for this first round, they get 5 minutes each. I'm sure that some of our participants can do that. I'm a little worried about our faculty. So therefore, Eric, I'd like to start with you.
I see, I get the prize.
But you can stay there. I'm going to come join you over there in a moment. Well, Google has made very substantial investments in green energy for its own operations. Can you tell us a little bit about how your team made the business case for those investments?
Well, I began by, I went to one of these seminars here at Stanford, and I learned that building efficiency was a big problem. And it occurred to me that we had a lot of buildings. So I called the people in, and I said, what are we doing about efficiency? And they said, oh, no, not much. And I said, well, how much do you need? And they said, oh, you know, a couple $1 million. Well, what's the payback? And they said, 18 months. I said, what? You're sitting on a couple $1 million, 18 months payback, and you haven't told me? Oh, we just didn't get around to it, you know, that kind of thing. Do it. So far, none of the energy efficiency things that we have faced have cost us in any material way because the payback is so quick. Why doesn't everyone understand this? Take your building, insulate it, put the right switching lights in it, and so forth, and you make money, right? Good, solid, conservative CEO principles. Huh, pretty interesting. Well, so we did that. So then we thought, everyone's talking about energy. Is there a way where we could solve all the problems at once? Is there a way where we could solve energy independence, obviously national security, make a better future for us, reduce our dependence on foreign oil, invest in American jobs and American businesses, oh, and by the way, solve this enormous climate change problem? So we've produced, in fact, a plan. Using your favorite search engine, you can find it. It's called the Google Energy Plan. And basically, it goes like this. Over 22 years, if you simply implement what the Precourt Institute is working on, just as a matter of rebuilding America's energy infrastructure, you ultimately save $1 trillion. How do you save $1 trillion? By investing in all these incredibly expensive renewable energy things and so forth, and hybrids and so forth. Well, it turns out it's relatively simple. Simply hold energy per capita use constant going forward in all 50 states, the way California has done since 1973, through regulation, which is relatively easy to do and easy to adopt. All of a sudden now, you don't have to build all those incredibly expensive plants. And you could take that money and apply it to wind, solar, enhanced geothermal, all of which is going to be done in your center. The math is close now to making them cost neutral, not quite. With subsidies they are in some cases. But the important thing is that plus the grid gives you an opportunity for half of the energy problem. The other half you do with transportation. And you do that with a combination of biofuels, again, something Stanford is doing very well in, as well as the use of various complex combinations of hybrids. And the combination of those with lower weight, greater efficiency means less fuel use. Less fuel use savings pays for the whole conversion. You can convert half the cars. So my point is, we sit here all day, we say, isn't it great that Stanford, right, has been investing in this, knows it, and it's going to apply to 5% of the problem. I say to you that this opportunity is 100% of the solution, not a 5% solution.
Great. Well, that actually is a perfect introduction to ask Jim Sweeney to say a few words about energy efficiency research here at Stanford. It'll be an essential part of the new institute. Can you just tell us something about the most important barriers to increasing efficiency of energy use and how we get past those? Eric has just told us that there are $100 bills lying around all over the place if we would just go pick them up. So how do we do that?
Yeah. Eric is absolutely right on. The opportunities for saving energy in a way that's economically attractive for the individual corporations and the individual homeowners are profound. The estimate, my own personal estimate, or the estimate that came from the American Physical Society's recent study on energy efficiency, suggests maybe 30% of our use of energy could be reduced over maybe 10 or 20 years from what it would have been otherwise by things for which the benefits exceed the cost for the individual decision makers. So that's the $100 bills. But if you have $100 bills laying on the ground and nobody's picking them up, it probably means they're glued down on the ground pretty tightly. It's not obvious often how to start getting them picked up. And this is where we get in a lot of the work from social sciences, where we try to pay serious attention to the behavioral issues. On the supply side, my simple model is if you get the technologies right, the economics right, and the regulations right, you're going to be able to solve the problem. On how we use energy, we have 350 million people in the United States alone. We extend to the rest of the world, many, many more, making decisions without the depth of information that Eric was talking about. And without that information, you're not getting large decisions. So what are some of the managerial, social science issues that we can think about? Well, first thing I say behavior. In a corporation, when we say behavioral response, what we normally mean is management. Actual management matters an awful lot for leadership within the corporations, is the example that we just saw. But if you think about an analogy, we've known as a nation for many, many decades that smoking is harmful. And yet, just saying that didn't stop people from smoking. It took a set of coordinated parallel efforts that started changing behavior. First, and you might want to think of that as a parallel here for energy efficiency. First, I agree with something that we heard a few moments ago. You've got to get the prices right for carbon prices, and you've got to get all of the other incentives right. Second, you've got to have what we call agency problem solved. Somebody's making a decision that's good for them but not good for the final user. One wonderful example of that is in electric utilities that make decisions, instead of making decisions on energy efficiency that will help their customers, they may make investments that get more revenue for them, even though it's, quote, on behalf of their customers. Decoupling matters. Education matters. Local decision-making. Just as in smoking, we had a concerted effort of warnings, taxes, prices, local education, information. I think we're going to need all of those things in order to solve this problem of 350 million people making the right decisions.
Sally, it's your turn. You lead a wide-ranging research program aimed at reducing greenhouse gas emissions from energy conversions. Can you give us some examples of where you think real research opportunities exist for the next generation of technologies?
Sure. Thanks, Lynn. I want to start off with the good news, and that is that there's no shortage of energy resources on Earth. There's no shortage of energy resources, and I think we often lose sight of that there's abundant energy in the sun, in the wind, in geothermal energy, renewable energy resources. There are vast accumulations of chemical energy stored in fossil fuels, and there's nuclear energy stored in radioactive materials. And together, and even each one of these is a tremendously large energy resource. So as we think about the challenge and the opportunity here, it's not to find energy supplies, it's to find a way to convert those available energy resources in a way that's environmentally sound and affordable into valuable energy services that we need. So as an example, if you think about renewable energy resources, the sun, the wind, very large resources, but the sun shines when it shines and the wind blows when it blows. So the challenge is to make that energy available when and where we need it. And if we look at the fossil fuel resources, abundant domestic resources, in the case of coal in particular, what we need to do is find a way that coal can be used in an environmentally friendly way and such there are no carbon dioxide emissions and that we can eliminate traditional air pollutants. So this is the challenge. Again, we want to find ways to take these abundant resources and make them available to provide all of the energy services that we come to know, lighting, heating, cooling, cooking, transportation, communication services. So I think now we need to harness that same kind of ingenuity that over the past several hundred years gave us the electric generator, the steam engine, the transistor, the internet. Take this ingenuity and harness it to create an energy system for the 21st century and beyond. So what are some of the exciting possibilities that are being worked on? Well, solar energy to start off with. You mentioned that there was 6,000 times more solar energy than humans use. Well, that's a tremendous amount of energy. The trick, though, is to find a way to make solar energy less expensive, because today it is more expensive, and also to find a way to make it more efficient. Today's solar conversion technologies are well below the potential theoretical limits. So what we're finding is scientists and faculty and students are working on nanomaterials, nanoscience, that allows atomistic control over the solar absorption and electron transport properties of the materials. And one example, we have a whole portfolio of projects that would enable a solar cell to be 45% efficient or greater. Also working on the other end of the spectrum, really expensive solar cells that you could print with an inkjet printer. Just a phenomenally imaginative idea. And also, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could make liquid fuels from solar energy? And we have scientists working on finding ways to split water, make hydrogen that can be used either as hydrogen or other fossil fuels. Wind is also extremely important and sort of probably not so well-known aspect of our energy system is that the growth of wind worldwide has been tremendous, about 30% over the last year. And there's potential for much more wind power, particularly if we continue to develop advanced power electronics, advanced materials, and improved grid integration strategies. So I named 2 renewable energy resources, very exciting. However, we have an electric grid today that was built about a central station power model where we had very, very large power generators, and that electricity flowed out to homes through transmission and distribution lines. But in the future, we can imagine a very different grid where we have much more distributed generation and we have much more intermittent generation. So we're going to need a much smarter grid. We're going to need multi-level communications. We're going to need advanced power electronics, and we're also going to need things like grid-integrated, very large-scale energy storage that will help smooth out the fluctuations in the electric grid. And there are great ideas in all of these areas that are being pursued today. Biofuels, there's a lot of discussion of biofuels these days. If we can find a way to make growing biofuels climate friendly, and if we can find a way to make the life cycle efficiency better than it is today and lower the costs of conversion of cellulose to biofuels, these too can play a big role in our energy future. So one of the projects we're working on at GSEP is to find a way to convert the woody parts of the plant into biofuels more efficiently. So I went to Canada one time, and it was in the dead of winter, and it happened to be a day that was like 40 degrees below, 40 degrees below. Turns out centigrade and Fahrenheit are the same at that temperature. And anyway, I came up there, and I was going to talk about solar energy. I was really excited about solar energy, and it got dark around 3 o'clock that day, and I just said, oh my goodness, these guys think I'm going to be delusional. So anyway, so I think it is also very important that we find ways to where needed and where appropriate to use fossil fuels in a climate-friendly manner. So technologies like carbon dioxide capture and storage are extremely important. The idea is that instead of letting the CO2 go into the atmosphere, that you capture it, you compress it, and you inject it back underground for permanent sequestration. So that, too, I think is important, particularly with the sobering fact that 50% of our electricity comes from coal today. And a rapid transition, though certainly There are many advances in renewables, but having the technology of carbon dioxide capture and storage would make a big difference. So anyway, there's just tremendous possibilities across the board. Energy research is perfectly positioned to take advantage of all of the recent advances in nanoscience, nanotechnology, molecular biology, communications. It's a really very ripe time and very exciting, and I can't wait.
Good, thank you. So, Jane, Sally described lots of cool things to work on. So there are going to be plenty of opportunities, but we're going to need some talented people to put all this to work. You've been teaching Stanford undergraduate and graduate students about energy for almost 20 years. And you have lots of experience in the energy arena. How has student interest in that area changed over that period?
It's such a wonderful softball question for me, and I'm so grateful for it.
And she has no opinions on the matter, so
I hope there are hundreds, if not thousands of you in this audience who feel like I do, which is this is one of the best days of my life. I am so excited about what these donors are doing for Stanford and what the institution is prepared to do. So there's a good solid gaggle of us. Lynn tells me there's these amazing, and it's so exciting, 137 faculty who are touching energy at Stanford today. But when I started teaching 20 years ago, it felt like there was just a little club of us. That wasn't to say that there weren't a lot of people interested in the topic. But when you dial back 20 years ago, some of people's biggest interest was really a grand awareness around environmental problems, and we hadn't tuned into global warming and climate change at that point. But we'd shifted from a world that when I took the class I've been teaching for 20 years, 30 years ago, we all thought we were running out of everything, which Sally very appropriately said, we're not. That's not the issue. So 20 years ago, student interest really lay with the idea that we had environmental issues. And people started entering energy through the back door of the environment. And my dear, wonderful, remarkable colleague, Gil Masters, at the time, 20 years ago, was teaching literally hundreds of students classes. His class was Environmental Science and Technology, one of the most popular classes on campus. 20 years ago, when I started teaching, I literally was a little worried about whether people knew how to spell the word energy, and I was very generously housed in the Department of Petroleum Engineering at the time. And out of a kind of freak idea I had to make sure someone would show up to my class, I actually was so desperate, I hired an airplane to fly over campus and drag a banner around that said, take energy resources, learn about energy. And thank goodness I did that, because out of the 40 students who showed up, 35 of them had seen the plane. So the good news, I really sit before all of you as someone who's cared deeply. I said to someone, other than my family, my friends, and my business, which I'm in love with, all of those things, energy education at Stanford is the most important thing in my life. So that's why I say this is such an exciting day. But let's go back to the story. What about student interest? Because it's really student interest that's fed my passion for this all along. So you go 20 years ago, students' main interest was around the environment. I'd say 10 years ago, student interest started to move to really starting to come to grips with the fact energy is not just a resource like oil or the sun, and it's not just the cold beers and hot showers that Amory Lovins talks about as energy services, it's just how they're all connected. So I think 10 years ago, I really saw a group of hardcore students, maybe about 50 of them a year at the most, maybe closer to 25, it's hard to look in the rearview mirror, who were really interested in energy systems. Today, from an interest level, there's huge interest on campus, largely driven by kind of oh my God, there is really no higher calling in life than to figure out how we're all going to respond to climate change. And it doesn't take rocket science to realize that the most important thing we can do is look at the engine of our problem of climate change, which is how we use energy. So that's where student interest, from my point of view, lies today. When you look at how many classes over the last 20 years, and what's the composition of those classes been? So again, I had to send up a plane to start my first class. Gil was teaching in the beginning hundreds of students environmental science and technology. 10 years later, so 10 years ago, where we were, was I was teaching about 50 students every fall, and I didn't have to put up a plane to get them to show up. So that was a great relief. It was a little embarrassing to do that, to jumpstart a class in the first place. You have to remember, I'm a lecturer. Tenure track faculty would never be caught dead doing, alive or dead, doing one of those pranks to get things started. I started teaching a class 10 years ago called The Coming Energy Revolution, really in response to what we all at least those of us close to the topic, hoped was coming. And again, I had twice as much interest in that class than we had space. By then, Gil had moved on from his environmental science and technology class. He was eyeing what he thought was retirement, and he'd created a sister set of classes, energy efficient buildings and electric power class. Both classes had about 50 students a year in them. And at about that time, two friends of mine, Mike and Diane Ming, and I decided that we would create a visiting professorship at Stanford because we realized there weren't enough classes at the time to address at least some of the energy problems that students were interested in. So we had visiting professors at Stanford for about 5 years after that. Today, again, so really, as you all know, interest in energy classes and student resources around energy at Stanford over the last 20 years have kind of gone like this, and now they're going like this. I pinged Gil over the weekend. I said, so how many students are in your energy efficient buildings class this year? And it's 150 students, double what he had last year. So the student response is incredibly strong. I just want to give a couple other senses of things because I know our time is short, but you think 20 years ago, degree offerings for students interested in energy, not necessarily some of the specific disciplinary subdisciplines that are all very important, but basically Gil, with some help from myself and a few other people, for the first 15 years of the 20 years we're talking about, we really, and some of the people that came out of this effort are remarkable and are great leaders in the energy arena today, but we shepherded a pipeline, largely Gil, of individually designed majors to accommodate this kind of cult-like interest in energy systems that I talked about before. The really exciting thing today is the degree options for Stanford students range from master's and PhD in our IPER program, which is a very exciting program. We've got bachelor's and master's earth science, energy track in earth systems. We have an atmosphere and energy program that has bachelor's and master's tracks to it. Management science and engineering, which Jim is an important leader in. There's a new master's program that's offered there. So we have an almost exploding or bubbling degree activity going on. And all these things add up to the fact that now is the time for this institution, for this organization that's going to pull this all together and make it really, cohesive for students, because they honestly are really interested in an efficient path, which is they want to come into Stanford once either already determined to pursue energy as a subject area, or they come in through the back door of climate/environment and decide they want to do it, and they want to understand the world as it is today as quickly as they can, because they know the reason they're here is they want to change it. And so part of our opportunity, I think, is to think about how can we make more efficient the baseline of understanding the context of where we are, because I got to tell you, the students we get in our classrooms today, they are some of the best warriors from an academic point of view, and from these are people who really, really want to change the world. So, one of the things Lynn's heard me talk about, and many other people, just 2 more points, and then I will zip it, but student activity. I would say for the first 15 of those 20 years, it was classic, organic, grassroots, wonderful Stanford activity. Today, again, we have an explosion of interest. I think there's 12, 15 different student groups. The most visible one is something that the 11th Hour Project did a great job supporting, the Energy Crossroads, which launched this nationally, if not globally visible, wonderful conference a couple years ago, where the students, it was really a cry to action to say, listen, we want to engage the corporate community, the government community, our faculty, our research here, and we want to have a way to convene thought leaders. And we want students to see what an important place Stanford is for thinking about energy and our planet. So really exciting. And then Students for Sustainable Stanford, the GSB, I've been stunned by the fact, which I'm an alum of the GSB, and I'm so proud. They have over 100 students at any given time involved in their energy club. So this student activity is there. And my final point and pitch is if you looked at student advising needs, which I spend a lot of time that I probably should have been spending running my company, and I have hired some people on my staff to help provide student advice, that 20 years ago, student advising was manageable. If you say, what was it like 10 years ago? It was strained. Today, I say, with a huge commitment to help Lynn solve the problem, it's insufficient. The interest in getting advice of how to go and make a difference is just, a huge appetite out there. And again, this great institute, I'm very confident, can help meet those needs.
We'll do our best. But next time, Jane, could you be a little more enthusiastic about the teaching?
Sorry, folks.
So John, Jane's got lots of smart students who are ready to go to work here. and you've been actively engaged in investing in green technologies over the years now. So how do we make it possible for green energy to grow to be a much bigger fraction of the energy we use? You know, are we doing enough research? Are we doing all the things we need to do to make that happen?
Well, the answer to your question about enough research is no, we're not doing enough. The answer to your question about how we get it to be a lot bigger is one word, it's economics. I like to compare energy to the internet. The internet, 15 years after the first browser, is by some measures about $1 trillion economy, and there's 1.2 billion users of the internet. Well, energy is a $6 trillion economy, and there's 4 billion users of electricity. So I like to say energy is the mother of all markets. And if you won't agree with me on that, perhaps you'll agree that it could be the largest economic opportunity of the 21st century. Now, if you look at our energy system as a whole, a couple things stand out. One is that for the United States, 6% of our energy comes from renewable resources, wind, solar, we mentioned those. 30% of our energy is purchased from outside the US, fossil fuels. And so in 2007, last year, we borrowed over $1 billion a day to purchase energy for the US needs, or as Al Gore likes to put it, we've been borrowing money from China to buy oil in the Middle East, to burn it in ways that are harmful for our planet. That's borrow, buy, burn. Every part of that has got to stop. So the key to making energy a lot bigger part of our future is to make sure that the preferred outcome is going to be the profitable outcome, because then it's more likely to be the probable outcome. And I think what's at stake here is whether or not the United States, and even Silicon Valley, is going to be the worldwide winner in the next great global industry, which is going to be green technologies. And that's not at all clear. If you looked at Kleiner's investments, we've made 5 investments in Germany because there's centers of technical excellence there. If you list the 30 leading companies in solar, wind, and batteries, the US occupies only 6 positions. Make that same list for the internet, and it's nearly a clean sweep. So the way to do this, the way to get it done, is to get this institute going at Stanford, make sure we make the right investments, and then have the right incentives so that we accelerate innovation. We're only going to get there with that combination of investments, incentives, and innovation.
Great, thank you. Well, Eric, John has given us an admonition that we needed to think about the economics here, and but Google's had an initiative to try to figure out how to make renewables less expensive than carbon-based energy resources. Can you talk a little bit about that initiative and what you hope to accomplish?
Well, I completely agree with John's comment about incentives. If you think about it, if you had a choice of something that was both renewable and less expensive, you would clearly choose it. If it were the same price, you would also choose it. The issue is it's today more expensive. A good example here is in automobiles. With plug-in hybrids, you really do start getting the life cycle long enough and the savings good enough that they become economically viable. From our perspective, we're actually investing in companies, and in particular, some of the companies that John talks about, to try to get the market started around solar, wind, and enhanced geothermal. There are many, many new technological opportunities before us, and they need capital and they need a market. In order to kickstart it, you need the students, you need the researchers, you need the capital, and you need the market. And the quicker we can make that cycle happen, the better. I'd observe right now that we have an awful lot of people who are unemployed or concerned about employment or so forth, especially in the construction industry. So why don't we figure out a way to get them to insulate homes and insulate buildings, because it's a good job for them. There's a lot of things that we can do right now, because every day we waste is a day lost against this insurmountable problem of climate change 30, 50 years from now.
Sally, you know, if we're really going to use plug-in hybrids in a big way to make significant dent in emissions of CO2, for example, from transportation. And transportation is a tough one in terms of CO2. What do we have to do that?
Well, I mentioned earlier that 50% of our electricity in the United States comes from coal. So that if we are today to simply switch to plug-in hybrids, whereas there might be benefits in terms of traditional air pollutants and so forth, it doesn't really change the amount of carbon dioxide that would be emitted to the atmosphere by that alone. So really what we need to do is work on this project to decarbonize the grid, to make more electricity with less carbon. So we talked a lot about renewable energy. So the more renewable energy we can put on the grid, the better. I also talked about carbon dioxide capture and storage. And that's an area where it's a newer technologies in some ways, and it's costly and it's energy intensive. And whereas we have large storage or sequestration resources, they're really unproven. So we need to move quickly on all fronts, research into renewables, more rapid deployment of renewables, and more rapid research to prove out whether carbon dioxide capture and storage can actually make a difference. But I agree with you, the transportation sector is really challenging, and I think we not only need to work on strategies that move towards electrification, but in parallel, we have to have competitive approaches of other ways of taking carbon off the vehicles.
So what about batteries? Did anybody want to talk about batteries? John, you might want to say something, or Sally?
No.
Sure. Batteries are a holy grail of green technology. There's been very little improvements over batteries for a long period of time. But if the microprocessor is the brains and hearts of the personal computer, the battery is going to be the foundation technology for advanced automobiles. And the United States isn't even in that race right now. We buy them from Asia.
Yeah.
Today, I think Lutz announced that General Motors is going to make cells as well as battery packs for the Volt. But we're not in the game. There's a number of really exciting breakthroughs, including at least one that I know of here at Stanford. But energy storage is very, very important.
Sally, do you want to say a word about the battery stuff?
Well, yeah, not only is it important for transportation sector, it's also very important for incorporating more renewables into the grid. So in GSEP, this is one of the important areas we're working on, and there have been very exciting developments in components of batteries that could perform up to 10 times better than technologies that are available today. But that's very fundamental research, and we have a long way to go in terms of converting those to real products.
So, Jim, transportation, of course, is one of the key ways we Californians contribute CO2 to the atmosphere and use energy. You've been working with the state on how the heck we're going to get to the AB 32 requirements. What can you tell us about where things stand on that and what the best possibilities are?
Well, in the short run, that's over the next 5 or 10 years, we can accomplish a large amount of the carbon reduction through having people move to either smaller cars, less high-performance cars, less acceleration cars. So it's the behavioral choices that people make of the amount of cars. One of the challenging things that the state is going to be taking on is starting working with local communities and regional authorities to try to start restructuring where people live and what the transportation systems are. If you have moved to electric vehicles, that as Sally suggested, still use right now a large amount of carbon dioxide because the electricity that they use is coming from fossil fuels, you can much more effectively reduce carbon dioxide by things that cause people to actually have fewer vehicle miles. Now again, it gets down to very complicated systems. It's a tax system that causes cities to be developed the way they are. It's the regional authorities that create some regional plans. It's how industry is located relative to where where residential areas are located. And it's even as simple things as facilitating and encouraging carpooling and carpooling systems. So that I think we have a two-pronged solution. One is on the technology, and we've heard a lot of stress on the technology here. And that's absolutely essential, those technological solutions. But then it's the utilization of that technology. How much we utilize that technology is going to be really fundamental. And the transportation system, you know, you can get a very fuel-efficient vehicle, but if you can't move it on the congested road, you're still going to have a disaster. So you need to look at the overall system, not simply the individual technologies.
Okay. So, John and Eric, here's a question for both of you. John, you spoke to Congress last week, and Eric, you've been advising the Obama transition team. So what'd you tell them?
I told them actually 6 things. The first is to use this Economic Recovery Act to stimulate and make sure we accelerate a unified national smart grid. We're going to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on infrastructure. I submitted that's a more important infrastructure than the next highway that's ready to go. Second, that you got to put a price and cap on carbon. And while I favor a carbon tax that's revenue neutral, no net new taxes to the American people, it's clear they're going to try to implement a cap and trade regime. I actually think we could do both, and they each have their own merits. The third thing is that we ought to get a national renewable portfolio standard at the national level, which would say that 20% of our electricity by a point in time, and increasing, would come from renewable resources. The fourth thing I looked for was a set of utility regulations and incentives so that our utilities would be the most powerful partners we could have in the world to drive to this zero carbon environment. Because as a businessman, gosh, utilities have 100% market share. They have incredible cash flows and low cost of capital. So anyone who thinks that the government is going to do this without the private sector is wrong. More money flows through markets in a day than all the governments in the world in a year. So get the utilities as partners. And California is the best example of that. And we got to get serious about funding research, especially in green technology and other incentives. Last year's federal funding for renewable R&Ds was less than $1 billion. And by the way, most of it was to national labs, not to universities. That's less than one day's revenues for Exxon, which is only the 17th largest energy company in the world. So it's near criminal. Where do we convene the war crime trials? That is such a low number. But the sixth and final thing that I said is, in all this work on energy, do not, absolutely do not overlook the investments we got to make in education. Whether it's doubling the number of high-quality charter public schools so that all kids got a chance at a good education, whether it's figuring out a way to double the number of kids who come from our high schools who want to study engineering and the sciences, or stapling a green card to the diploma of every graduate with a degree in engineering or sciences so they can stay here. We got a great national strategy. Let's bring them over here, train them, and then make them leave.
A crisis is a terrible thing to waste, and we have one heck of a crisis right now. I think everybody sees it in the papers and you understand it, and now is the time to act. When things are going really well, it's very hard to develop the political consensus to really make the kinds of changes that John, I think, so ably pointed out. So my message has been, act now. You won't get it right, you'll make some mistakes, but if you don't act now, it's not going to fix it. And do it in the context of the other political objectives that you have, which have to do with employment, to get America working again. And the analogies here are obvious to the things that occurred after the Depression, although we're certainly not in a depression. But the important thing is that the government has a role both to set proper regulation and also set the right incentives. The incentives that John talked about, in a regulatory, the regulations are not that complicated. An example would be that it's been very difficult to get the grids to actually get upgraded. So you could have an incentive where you get a national right-of-way if you have renewable portfolio standards in both states. There are lots of clever ideas like that they could get things to move more quickly. The energy industry moves relatively slowly by comparison to the world I come from. It needs to move a lot faster because you have so little time.
Yeah, so Jane, actually this fits into something I wanted to ask you, and that was that your company invests in royalties associated with natural gas and wind and solar. Are you, given the current state of the credit tax equity crunch, can you still do deals? Can you still, are you able to get grid access to do this kind of stuff?
So asking about our business is always a little bit tricky because we have a very, very unique business. But we have access and visibility to seeing all the wells that are getting drilled for natural gas in the United States and all the turbines that are going into the ground for wind. And you know, we definitely have a significant credit crunch, which has caused a lot of people to go, and then tax equity, which is a fundamental element in the way we operate right now in terms of financing renewables, which that's a whole big topic in and of itself. There's all of a sudden been a huge compression in the availability of tax equity because it depends on people being profitable and needing to shelter their taxable income. And that goes back to how we've structured renewable energy incentives. And so again, as Eric points out, there's nothing like a crisis to prompt us. There's been a lot of people who think there is a better way to provide incentives and financial structure to the renewables industry. So I think that discussion is being added to some of the other economic stimulus and renewable policies that are being rolled out. But it's fascinating to me to see that just at a global level, at a national level, natural gas is an interesting fuel to bet on or to think about, because on one level, it's a very serious greenhouse gas. On another level, Chris Flavin and lots of other people would coin it as the prince of hydrocarbons. That is a transition fuel to moving to where Sally and others talk about where we would like to go as quickly as possible to renewables. One of the things that everybody's focused on a bit until our grid gets quite as smart as we'd like it to be is we're seeing a trend actually of more wind farms getting sited with a new gas power plant right next to it to help provide that stability to the grid. I mean, most Americans don't know that probably for the last 10 years, the #1 source of incremental electricity in our country is natural gas. There's a forward market in natural gas turbines that would surprise most people, where you have to lock them down now if you want to put them in the ground a few years out. Most Americans don't know that the #2 source of new electricity installed in our country the last 3 years is wind. Why? It's because even without some of the policy measures we have, where the wind exists, where it gets built, is the cheapest form of incremental electricity. So it's really exciting for me to hear about our new renewable component of what this institute's going to be doing, and that it's going to be driving for renewables to be cost effective. But we have the confidence that we have one renewable source of electricity I think we can get national consensus on that's very economic today. So some of the financing aspects of it, Lynn, are kind of experiencing a hiccup right now, but crisis, and I feel like what we see, our business actually is benefiting, I have to say quietly, from what's going on in the industry, because there's a Darwinian effect that when you get this shakeup of the tax equity shifting and the credit affecting, the strong companies prevail. So we're going to see some consolidation that's forcing companies to focus on the very best resources, and that actually will have some benefits to it. So there's some short-term pain, but long-term gain. And I think if you look back at 2008, one of the most exciting things for me is the most conservative, least likely people in our country were standing up and saying, we're going to have 20% of our electric power mix being wind within 20 years. And there's basically a consensus you can put your hands around on that gives me enormous confidence that we'll actually blow that away.
Let me add that there are a number of proposals that have not yet been approved either by the Congress or by the President-elect, which are of the form of essentially federally chartered renewable energy banks. And roughly you capitalize them with some number of billions of dollars, and then they loan money out at low interest rates. And because, as you pointed out, there's enough $100 bills around, it looks like those models will serve the same function, for example, of something called the Farm Credit Bureau that was established in 1916, Sally Mae and some of the other groups that were established in the 60s and 70s to provide low-cost capital for socially desirable institutions. So people are thinking about this credit issue, and again, we need to move now. Any one of those is better than nothing.
We're going to end up with a better outcome, actually.
So, well, I'm about to close this portion of it and open it up to questions from the audience. But, John, I'd just actually like to finish with you and ask you to tell us about the most promising technologies you see out there that might be coming into the marketplace in the not too distant future? What are you excited about?
Well, everywhere you turn, you see opportunity, and so maybe I'll mention 3 or 4 of them. There's advanced third-generation solar cells that will meet or beat today's grid electricity prices without any kind of subsidy. In fact, I read a survey that recently said there's 200 solar startups in the United States, and I think 100 of them in Silicon Valley, so much so, given the size of the markets and the possibilities for success, we might sit here a decade or 2 from now and call this thing Solar Valley instead of Silicon Valley. There's new wind turbine designs that can achieve demonstrably 2 or 3 times the BETS limit, which would dramatically change wind economics. There's a project to take millions of tons of municipal solid waste stream and use anaerobic digestion to, instead of sticking it in landfills, make electricity and syngas and even fertilizer. Instead of taking the CO2 and sequestering it under the earth, capturing it, pumping it down there, there's entrepreneurs who think they can use it as a valuable ingredient in products and then go sell a better cement or building countertop or roof tile. Solid state lighting, next generation fuels. Everywhere you turn, we're confronted by insurmountable opportunity. And the one thing I'm optimistic about is I think entrepreneurs always do more than anyone thinks possible with less than anyone thinks possible. And this is ground zero for entrepreneurs and the interaction with industry and the university. That's what happened in electronics and in the internet. And I hope the Institute will make it happen in energy.
So are any of you students inspired? So we have a few minutes for questions. I'm told, I can't see hardly anything out there, but I'm told that there are some microphones out and around, and so if you can, I see one here in the center.
So if you come stand, I'll hold the microphone for you.
Yeah, a question for Lynn about the scope of the Institute. So there's plenty of work to be done from basic science to policy, and in the middle, companies like National Semiconductor, where I am with Solar Magic. Where do you see the bulk of your attention being? You're going to be working with large companies or feeding startups or supporting policy thoughts?
Well, there'll be a big technology component. And I should say for all of my faculty colleagues who are in the audience, one of my first jobs is to come talk to all of you. So you'll be hearing from me as we try to work all this out. We also hope that the Institute will provide a better way to make connections between companies and researchers all across the campus with the full spectrum of activities that go both from the policy side and the technical side. Given our location in Silicon Valley, with all the technology components here, I think you can expect to see that that's going to be a big part of it. But we'll be counting on all of you to help us figure out how to do this and how to do it well. Let's see, how about over here?
It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Ernest Garcia. I'm a 1960s graduate from Cal Berkeley. It's very nice to be here at Stanford. I knew that would get a chuckle. I'm a director at an organization called the U.S.-China Green Energy Council. In November, we had a very successful conference in Beijing. My question, will there be at the new Precourt Institute a China outreach component?
Well, I can say a word about that. We actually, through the GSEP program, have been doing some work in China as well. It's clear that China has a huge role to play in the future, and in particular, the future of energy. John Hennessy mentioned China in his remarks as well. Exactly how we're going to do that, I don't know yet, but it is absolutely for sure that we have to think about China.
Just to interrupt briefly, Jim, you as well. So I have a class, China Energy Systems, where we have 60 students take the class and 30 go to China for 2 weeks. I know Jim, and I'll let him pipe in. There's amazing interest at the student level on the opportunity to work together and have various exchange efforts, and we're seeing fellowship opportunities for students to be moving both directions. And so my guess again, we're early in the game, is that Precourt's just going to help that bloom further. So I just wanted to make sure you knew there are actually many elements of China-US partnership already happening around energy at Stanford, which is great.
Right. And we have a program through actually Management Science and Engineering Department, but it's heavily linked to what the Precourt Institute, now I guess it's called Precourt Center now for Energy Efficiency, has, well, we have 30 members of the Chinese central government coming for 3 months here to get educated on public policy decision-making and public policy issues. We've done this for 3 years now. There's the highest level, I guess, is a Justice of the Supreme People's Court of China. We have people, many division directors. So that's an ongoing program. We have a group of people who are just arriving later this month from one region in the east of China, 30 people who will then go through regional development, educational systems, and a lot of work in energy efficiency as all part of what they're doing. So the intensity of interaction with China, I think, will continue, but it's really going on very strong right now.
Okay, so we'll go to over here.
Okay, so much of what I've gathered from the panelists is that in order to achieve the best solution, you need to achieve a whole systems solution. But private companies often operate in a very independent fashion, and I'm wondering if you can have any advice on how can private companies successfully approach the energy and environmental issues that we face from a whole systems perspective.
What's that?
Well, what's interesting is startups are most successful when, in fact, they focus and they don't try to solve everything, but they can exploit an opportunity within a system that's reasonably well thought out and then grow into it and then become very successful. When I think of it as the inverse of your question, which is the problem is not systems thinking at the private company, but rather at the regulators. So, for example, everybody's excited about wind power. There are issues about the distances that you can transmit that power and the costs and so forth. And you start getting into these complex regulatory discussions where they literally don't have a spreadsheet of all their costs, transmission, and so forth and so on. Because there's not a coherent model of how energy works, because there isn't a map of where things are, what the costs are, what you should incentivize them, people are making locally optimal but globally suboptimal decisions. That has to get addressed. And it has to be addressed by relatively simple rules at the public policy level that everyone can agree to. And that's, I think, where we really are. The entrepreneurs are really going to find these great pieces. So they'll figure out a way to build a better battery or a better fuel source or a better solar panel. The issue is if you get the solar panel and you can't connect it into anything, then fundamentally you're not going to get the scale that John talked about.
Good. How about over here?
I thought the comparison with the problem of cigarettes causing health problems was very well thought out. We are going to have a lot of difficulties doing this because there is not a consensus. There are a lot of people in Washington and around the world who wish to see the United States continue to be dependent on imported oil. The Saudi Arabian government in particular has hired many lobbyists and has paid off many American politicians in order to prevent the programs we're talking about today, so as to continue a situation where the United States has no choice but to prop up conservative governments in the Persian Gulf.
So is there a question lurking in there?
Yes. The question is, to what degree are you going to be able to deal with the political issues that are going to frustrate and undermine your attempts to build a new energy economy?
Jim, I think that's closest to your area of expertise.
Yeah, first of all, we at Stanford don't have the political clout of the same sort of revenues that you're describing, but we do have a bully pulpit. We have the power of ideas, and the power of ideas is very, very it can be very, very influential over time. And you think about what we do is the power of ideas. It's the power of ideas of the students and the faculty, people who get educated, go to the various companies, go to governments, and starting understanding those various issues. That, I'm willing to bet on the power of ideas over the power of the Saudi Arabian money any day.
Okay. Oh, wait a minute. We have. Can you get down here to the?
First of all, I want to congratulate President Hennessy and all of you in the panel and others at the university for giving such a high-level concentration of talent as an alumnus. I'm very, very proud to be here today and to congratulate all of you. The question, Mr. Panetta, before he was taken back to Washington by the new president-elect, gave a talk at the Governor's Conference on Climate Change down in Beverly Hills. He talked about oceans and how oceans affect climate for over 60% of the world's population that lives within 100 miles of an ocean, which brings to mind, to me, living in the Bay Area and the Golden Gate Bridge, and in Australia with the heads outside of Sydney, that we have a tremendous, and you referred to wind, power that we're not adequately using. And I'm thinking of the tides that are in oceans all around the world within 100 miles, we'll say, of this 60% of the world's population. Is there anyone here that would like to refer and make some comments on the possibility of using tides as a source of energy?
Yeah. Sally, you want that,
sure.
Or Jane?
Yeah, so I didn't talk a lot about tides and waves, basically marine power systems. And one of the things we've studied at GCEP is what is the total amount of energy that's available from all of these different sources. And whereas tides and waves may have some particular benefits in particular communities, when we look at the worldwide potential for waves and tides, there just isn't that much usable work in them. But that's not to say they can't be very important in certain places, and there are good tidal power systems today. So it's important, but compared to, for example, the sun and the wind, it just isn't so large.
On the general theme of the oceans, the majority of the CO2 ends up in the oceans over time. And we are in the process of, for example, destroying all of the coral that's around in the world. And there's concern that much of the coral will be gone within 20 years. We're also changing the ecosystem, especially in the near ocean, the part of the ocean that's near the beaches, as you described, in such a way that large amounts of biodiversity and marine diversity is going away. This is roughly the equivalent of destroying the Amazon without noticing it, because we can't see underneath the ocean. So your question was very apt. If there is, in fact, significant sea level rise, of course, the majority of the deaths come from the things that occur in the coastal cities. And the cities are built near the oceans because 100 years ago, that was the only way you could get anywhere. And that's true, especially in the third world. So I believe that with climate change and with energy, the ocean is often forgotten, but is in fact much more central than people think. And I would encourage people here who have research interest in this to pursue it. I think it's the next great one after the agenda that we were talking about today.
And there is a Center for Ocean Solutions as part of the Woods Institute for the Environment that has that set of topics very much on its agenda as well. Over here, I know we're going to run out of time before we run out of questions, so go ahead.
A considerable amount of your discussion here today is centered on transportation and the various options for the future, be it electric cars or different kind of derivatives of that, say hydrogen cars, things like that. But I haven't heard you guys mention the role of public transportation at all. And for example, to get 100 million plug-in hybrids on the road at a cost of about $30,000 per car, that would mean about $3 trillion of investment from the public. And that, combined with Obama's infrastructure plan and the needed improvements to the highway system and the bridges systems and all of the automobile infrastructure, could come to maybe $4 trillion or more in the future. And I just want to know, do you guys think that this is truly the most effective use of our resources and the most sustainable use of our resources, or should there be more of a role of public transportation and high-speed rail and things like that?
Who wants that? Jim, you were...
Well, I believe that we've got to pay attention to utilization, how much we drive, not just the vehicles we drive in. That's clear. However, in designing it, a lot of the easy solutions for transportation turn out to be not so easy when you try to put them together. A lot of the rail systems people have talked about work really well in very highly dense cities, don't work as well in less dense areas. Sometimes bus transportation, and including even fixed lane bus transportation is more appropriate. So I think the thrust of your question, though, is, that I take it, is don't just think about the technologies of the private automobile, but think more broadly of the system about how people move and when people don't have to move. For example, I have, with great delight, in the last month, avoided 2 trips to Sacramento and 1 to Washington, D.C. by using the internet through conferencing and sitting at my office. That's also a way that we can communicate and move without actually physically moving. That all has to be part of the solution.
Well, time is going on, so let's do one last question over here, and then we'll thank everybody for coming.
Thank you. My name is Hayward Robinson. I'm the mayor of Menlo Park and also a graduate of the School of Engineering a while back. Actually, follow up on that last question, because I also listened very carefully and never heard the word transit. I heard talk about land use and the need to be smart about that, and we certainly are hearing that at the local level. But I really want to ask our Silicon Valley colleagues, how do we get the innovation engine that is Silicon Valley working on the public transit problem?
I think there's lots of entrepreneurs. There's technology entrepreneurs. There's urban entrepreneurs, urban design entrepreneurs. There's policy entrepreneurs. And this is such a multifaceted opportunity and challenge that I believe we've got to be very systemic about it. And my particular passion is climate and climate crisis. And if you look at the root of the problem, there's only 6 regions of the world that matter. And there's only 6 sectors of the economy that matter. And one of those is urban systems. And among urban systems, the only region that really matters is Asia. The largest single trend on the planet is urbanization. We're going to go from 2 billion people living in cities to 4 billion people living in cities, a doubling over the course of the next 40 years. So how it is they move people around in Beijing and in all the new cities that are built in Asia is the fundamental question. There's very innovative approaches to it, but what I'd suggest to the entrepreneurs here is focus on the large part of the problem and then figure how to work in that system, in that economy. The techniques we'd use to affect BART in the Bay Area are very different than what you do to try to get an urban system, an economic one, a scalable one, adopted in Beijing, Shanghai, and the rest of China.
Well, that brings us to the time when I need to say thank you to all of you for coming. Thanks for your good questions, and thanks in particular to our panelists this afternoon who've given us a great snapshot of what might lie ahead. Thank you all.